The airport buzzed with movement. Announcements echoed overhead like background music to thousands of stories crossing paths. And yet, among the tide of luxury luggage, busy footsteps, and impatient glances, one soul stood still, lost in both direction and purpose. A young woman sat quietly on a plastic bench near gate 37, hugging a weathered suitcase that looked as worn as her shoes. Her name was Grace Turner, 24 years old. Unknown to the world, but everything to the woman she left behind. She wasn't traveling for adventure, business, or pleasure. She was traveling for survival. Her one-way ticket was not a journey to a dream but a desperate gamble to save her mother's life. She had just enough coins in her pocket to count individually. No coffee, no snacks, no backup plan. Then she heard it, a sound softer than the whisper of a jet engine, but louder than her own thoughts. A child's cry, thin and trembling, slicing through the noise like a beacon. Grace looked up. And in that moment, everything changed. Grace's hometown didn't appear on most maps. It was a quiet little place buried in the dust of the Midwest, where life moved slowly and dreams were postponed for more practical things like paying bills and surviving winters. Her mother, Lillian Turner, had always told her, "Grace, we don't need much, just enough to keep hope alive." But hope was expensive. A year ago, Lillian suffered a major stroke. Since then, she had lost her speech, her mobility, and much of her will to fight. Except when Grace was beside her, the medical bills piled up fast. Insurance didn't cover the kind of treatment that offered even a chance of real recovery. So Grace took on every job she could find, cleaning houses, late-night shifts at diners, even folding pamphlets at a dusty local print shop. She slept little. She ate less. Finally, she found a clinical trial in a city across the country. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was something. A miracle needed a vessel, and Grace chose to be that vessel. Her ticket was booked. Her bags were packed. Her mother's frail hand squeezed hers goodbye with more love than strength. And now, she waited. Alone. The airport was a city in itself, cold, bright, humming with tension. Grace sat near her gate, her backpack wrapped around her leg for security. Her suitcase, a pillow, a wall, a lifeline. She distracted herself by watching business people in Bluetooth calls, children dragging sparkly suitcases, elderly couples holding hands like the world was still a kind place. And then came the cry. At first, she thought it was just travel stress, a baby, perhaps, but it wasn't. It was different, softer, sadder. She stood and scanned the crowd until she spotted a tiny figure near a vending machine, nearly hidden behind a row of benches. The girl was maybe 5 years old, wearing a pink sweater and clinging to a stuffed white bunny. Her eyes were wide with panic. Grace approached slowly and knelt to her level. "Hey there, sweetheart, are you okay?" she said, keeping her voice calm and warm. The girl flinched and hugged her bunny tighter. I lost my daddy," she whispered. "We were looking at the fish tank. Then he was gone." Grace smiled gently. "What's your name?" "Liar," she said, voice trembling. "Well, liar," Grace said softly. "My name's Grace, and we're going to find your daddy. Promise." Grace looked around. No airport staff in sight. Security guards too far away. No one seemed to notice the crying child, just another blur in the crowd. She took Liar's hand. Together, they walked toward the fish tank. The little girl mentioned one of those decorative tanks near the food court. Still no sign of a panicked father. "Do you know your daddy's name?" Grace asked. Leah nodded. Michael when? He said to stay close." Grace's stomach sank. A 5-year-old separated from a parent in an international terminal was serious. But the girl wasn't panicking anymore, not while holding Grace's hand. "Let's go to the help desk," Grace said. But before they could move, a man's voice cut through the crowd. "Liar." It was loud, firm-laced with panic. Grace turned and saw a sharply dressed man pushing through a group of travelers. Tall, early 40s, neat suit, eyes frantic. "Daddy!" Liar screamed and ran into his arms. Michael dropped to his knees and hugged his daughter like he was holding on to his soul. Grace watched quietly, unsure whether to walk away or explain. The man looked up, saw her, and paused. His eyes met hers. For a moment, time didn't move. Michael was no ordinary father. That much became clear in how people looked at him, nervous, respectful, even deferential. But in that moment, he wasn't a millionaire. He was just a father who had almost lost his daughter, and the stranger in front of him, tired girl in worn-out sneakers, had stepped in when no one else did. "Did you stay with her?" he asked, his voice softer now. Grace nodded. She was scared. "I just wanted to help." He blinked, stunned. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." She smiled, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just glad she's safe." He looked at her closely, really looked. He noticed the frayed zipper on her suitcase, the dark circles under her eyes, the empty space in her wallet pocket. "Are you flying somewhere?" "Yes, just trying to get to Boston. Long trip." He didn't ask why, but he could tell this wasn't a vacation, and Grace didn't explain. Some stories don't need to be told out loud. Asterisk. As Grace turned to leave, Michael pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Alex," he said, "hold my meeting. Something just happened." "No, it's not business. It's important." He looked up again. "What's your name?" "Grace Turner." He smiled faintly. "That's fitting." Grace gave a small wave and returned to her seat, unaware that she had just changed the course of her own life. Asterisk. Grace leaned her head against the cold plane window, eyes closed but far from asleep. The hum of the engines filled her ears, but it couldn't drown out the whirlwind in her mind. She replayed the moment again and again, tiny hand in hers, the father's stunned expression, the gratitude in his voice. But it was over now. Just a moment. One moment of kindness in a life that had known so little in return. She didn't help for recognition. She didn't need thanks. She had learned long ago that most kindness is invisible, that you do the right thing because it's right, not because someone sees. Still, something about the way the man had looked at her made her wonder, not suspiciously, not even curiously, but deeply, like he had just watched something he couldn't quite put into words. Grace tried to shake it off. The seatbelt light blinked overhead. The plane was preparing to descend. Soon she would be in Boston, an unfamiliar city with no job, no apartment, no plan, just an address for the medical center where her mother's last hope waited. She stepped off the plane, into a cool wave of airport air, a small terminal, busy but quiet compared to the chaos she had left. She made her way to the taxi line with her suitcase, her only plan being to find a cheap motel, get her bearings, and show up at the hospital by morning. She never saw the man in the suit quietly watching from behind a row of tinted windows, his phone pressed to his ear. "Find out who she is," Michael said calmly. "I want everything quietly. She doesn't need to know." 2 hours later, Grace sat in a corner diner with chipped countertops and a blinking neon sign. Her coffee was half filled, because it was all she could afford. The waitress had offered a refill, but she had politely declined. Saving every cent mattered now. She pulled out a notepad and began scribbling. Hospital location, subway routes, job postings from a local paper someone left behind. Outside, rain began tapping on the window. Inside, someone else was watching her, a woman in a navy blue trench coat pretending to scroll through her phone. Her name was Clara, and she worked in private investigations. Tonight, she wasn't looking into a criminal or a scandal. She was here on behalf of someone who had seen something remarkable. Clara wasn't new to this kind of work. She'd done background checks for years, but something about this case felt different. The girl sitting alone at the diner wasn't running from anything. She wasn't trying to cheat anyone or hide a secret. She was just trying to survive. And still she had stopped everything to help someone else. Back in his penthouse suite, Michael Wen stared out at the city. The world saw him as a billionaire investor, a tech genius, a man who had turned an idea in his garage into an empire. But behind all the headlines and Forbes features, he was just a father who almost lost his daughter in a crowded terminal land, whose daughter had been found not by police or staff, but by a stranger who expected nothing in return. The idea of letting that moment pass unsettled him. He turned to his assistant, who had just returned from delivering a file. "Her name is Grace Turner," the assistant confirmed, "from a small town outside Kansas City. Mother recently had a stroke. Grace has been working multiple jobs. She left everything behind to get her mother into a treatment program at Boston General. That's all we know so far." Michael nodded slowly. "That's enough to begin." "Begin what, sir?" He didn't answer. He walked to his desk, picked up a pen, and began writing a letter longhand, not digital. His daughter's voice played in his head. "She held my hand and didn't leave me, Daddy, not even when I cried." That was the thing about true kindness. It revealed itself in small ways, but it echoed long after the moment had passed. The next morning, Grace arrived at the hospital early. The sun had barely crested the skyline, and already the waiting room was filled with worn-out families and the sharp scent of antiseptic. She spoke softly to the receptionist and handed over a folder containing all the documents she had: medical records, the referral letter, a copy of her ID. She waited, not knowing if they'd accept her mother into the program, not knowing if she had done enough, not knowing what to do if the answer was no. An hour passed, then two. Finally, a nurse approached with a soft smile. "Miss Turner." Grace stood, her heart raced. "Please come with me," the nurse said. "The director of the program would like to speak with you personally." Grace blinked. "I thought I'd just be filling out forms." The nurse only smiled again. He insisted. As she followed the nurse down the hallway, her mind swirled with possibilities. Did they reject her? Did they need more proof? Had she misunderstood something? She stepped into a modest office where a man in his 50s sat behind a desk stacked with medical files. He stood when she entered. "Grace Turner," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Rowland. Thank you for coming." She shook his hand, confused. "I have to say, it's not often we receive patients through this particular process. But, in your case, we've made an exception." Grace tilted her head. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Your mother has been approved for full care in the program," Dr. Rowland said, "including advanced rehabilitation and housing assistance." Her breath caught. "But I don't have the money yet." "You won't need it," he said gently. "Your case was brought to our attention by a private donor, someone who asked to remain anonymous, but who made it very clear that you and your mother should be given the very best." Grace stared, mouth slightly open, unable to process a donor. She hadn't applied for a grant. She hadn't told anyone. Her mind raced back to the airport, to the little girl, to the father who said nothing more than thank you. And yet, she sank into the chair, hands trembling. "Is this real?" she asked quietly. Dr. Rowland smiled. "Very." Outside the office, a woman in a navy blue coat was already on the phone. "She doesn't know who he is yet," Clara said, "but I think she's starting to guess." Michael listened quietly on the other end. Then he said, without hesitation, "Good. But this isn't the end of her story. It's just the beginning." And far across the city, Grace Turner stepped out of that hospital not with certainty, but with something just as rare called hope, the kind that only visits those who give it away first. The rain hadn't let up since morning, but Grace didn't care. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she walked through the city without the crushing weight of worry pressing down on her chest. Her mother was in the hospital, safe and stable. She had been accepted into one of the best treatment programs in the country without cost, and although the mystery of how that happened still hung in the air, she let herself breathe. She stood under the awning of a small cafe near the hospital, watching the cars roll by, steam rising from her paper cup. The coffee was hot, fresh, and paid for by a nurse who said, "Someone left this for you at the desk." Just a simple gift, no note, no explanation. But Grace didn't need one. Something had shifted. She felt it in her bones. Someone was helping her, and not from pity but perhaps from something far deeper. She had grown up learning not to expect kindness. Life had been tough, even before her mother fell ill. Her father had disappeared when she was 10. Her mother had done everything she could to raise her alone. Grace had worked since she was 16, waitressing, babysitting, even painting mailboxes in the summer heat. They made ends meet, but only barely. And yet, through it all, her mother had told her, even when it's hard, don't let the world turn your heart cold. Now, in this rainy city she didn't know, surrounded by strangers, that warmth was returning to her in strange, quiet ways. Back in a sleek glass office high above downtown Boston, Michael sat in front of a screen, filled with numbers and deadlines, but his mind wasn't on business. It hadn't been since that day in the airport. The world knew him as sharp, relentless, unstoppable. He built companies the way some people built Legos, fast, precise, profitable. But what no one really understood was that everything he built came from a deeper place. His daughter had changed everything. Before Lyra was born, he had lived in boardrooms and hotel rooms, chasing deals across the globe. He was good at it, ruthless even. But the night his daughter came into the world, tiny and pink and crying into his chest, something in him softened for the first time. And when she'd gone missing in the airport that day, he hadn't just felt fear, he felt helpless. A man, with all the money in the world, brought to his knees by the thought of losing the one thing he couldn't buy back. Grace had been the hand that reached out in that moment, not for credit, not for gain, just because it was the right thing to do. Now he felt something he hadn't expected, a need to know her more. He hadn't spoken to her since that brief exchange at the airport, but his team had sent updates, quietly, respectfully, and every update painted the same picture: selfless, humble, strong. He called Clara again. "I want her to have options," he said, "not just her mother's care. I want to know what she wants, what she dreams about, not in a creepy way, just real. She deserves more than just survival." Clara hesitated. "So what do you want me to do?" "Talk to her, casually. It seemed like coincidence. See what lights her up, what she'd do if money wasn't the issue. I'm not trying to interfere in her life, I'm trying to invest in it." Meanwhile, Grace had taken the long way back to her motel. She didn't know why, maybe to think, maybe to delay going back to that cramped, dimly lit room with its creaky mattress and strange smells. As she passed a bookstore, she stopped. Something in the window caught her eye. It was a simple journal, hardbound, dark green, with a quote embossed in gold foil: "The smallest act of kindness is worth more than the grandest intention." She went inside. She couldn't afford extras, but this time she let herself indulge. Just one thing, something quiet, something that reminded her of who she was when life hadn't worn her down. When she stepped up to the counter, the cashier smiled. "No charge." Grace blinked. "What?" "The lady before you said to cover your book. She didn't say why, just that you might need it." Grace stepped outside, the journal in her hand. The rain finally letting up. She looked around, but no one stood out. Just a city full of strangers. But someone, somewhere, was making sure she didn't feel invisible anymore. That night, back at her motel, she opened the journal and wrote just one line: "I don't know who you are, but thank you. I'm starting to believe again." And 2 blocks away, Clara watched from the shadows of a quiet bench. She took a photo not of Grace's face, but of her silhouette in the warm glow of the motel window, and sent it to Michael. With a single message, she writes, "A lot. She lights up when she sees books, especially old ones. Also, she never buys anything for herself unless she absolutely has to." That journal was the first thing she chose, for no reason in a long time. The reply came quickly. "Got it. I think I know what to do next." The next morning, Grace woke up to a letter slid under her motel room door. No return address, no signature, just a typewritten note. It read, "You gave hope without knowing it. Let someone return the favor. Go to 15 Beacon Street at 10 a.m. Trust." The process, her hands trembled. She didn't know if she should go. It could be a prank, a mistake, or worse. But deep inside, something told her this wasn't a trick. It was the beginning of something she never expected. Asterisk. Grace stood outside 15 Beacon Street, just before 10 a.m. Her coat pulled tight against the wind as a soft mist settled over Boston's cobblestones. The building towered, modestly, not grand like a government office, nor sleek like a bank. It looked more like something out of an old novel. Brick walls, ivy curling at the edges, heavy wooden doors that creaked when touched. She still wasn't sure why she came. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was hope. Maybe, just maybe, it was because some part of her believed the kindness she had given was circling back. She stepped inside. The lobby was quiet, lined with bookshelves, warm lighting, and the faint smell of cinnamon and paper. It didn't feel like a business. It felt like a sanctuary. A woman at the desk greeted her with a smile. "You must be Miss Turner." Grace blinked. "Yes, but how did you please? Right this way. He's waiting." Her heart skipped a beat. She followed the woman down a corridor lined with framed quotes, words about compassion, perseverance, and courage. One in particular caught her eye. "When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you." A joy, roomy. They reached a large room that looked nothing like what she expected. No boardroom table, no laptops, just tall windows, a fireplace crackling in the corner, and a single man standing by the window watching the rain. He turned around. Grace recognized him instantly. The airport, the father. "Hello, Grace," he said gently. "I'm Michael." When she nodded slowly, confused. "You're the one who's been." He raised a hand kindly. "Before I say anything else, I want you to know, I'm not here to make you feel uncomfortable or in debt. I didn't track you down to offer charity. I just couldn't forget what you did." Grace said nothing, but her fingers tightened. around her bag. "My daughter liar," Michael continued, walking over to a table where a photo sat. "Talks about you almost every day. She remembers how calm you were, how you stayed when others passed her by. That moment mattered more than you could know." Grace's voice finally emerged, hesitant. "I didn't do anything special." Michael looked up, his eyes serious. "That's where you're wrong." He gestured for her to sit. She did, reluctantly. "I built everything I have by solving problems, seeing potential where others saw risk. But what I saw in that airport wasn't business. It was heart. And I knew if someone like you existed in the world, quietly helping others even while struggling yourself, then maybe I could do more than just build companies. Maybe I could help build people." Grace tilted her head, unsure what that meant. "I've started something new," he said. "It's not public yet. A foundation, a program to lift people who have heart, but no ladder. I want you to be the first." "The first what?" "The first to receive a full scholarship education, housing, career development, and support for your mother's care without any strings attached. And before you ask why, it's because I believe in investing in the good, in the people who remind us who we're supposed to be." Grace froze. She couldn't speak. It was too much, too fast. She had never asked for any of this. "I'm not asking you to say yes today," Michael said. "I just want you to think about it. You helped Laya without even knowing her name. Now someone knows yours and wants to help back." She stood slowly, unsure what to do with her hands, her thoughts, her heart. "I don't know what to say," Michael smiled warmly. "You already said everything that mattered the moment you held my daughter's hand." Back in her motel room that night, Grace didn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word. What would her mother think? Would she say to take the chance, to trust it? On her nightstand, the green journal sat open. She wrote, "I've always been afraid that if I reached too high, I'd fall harder. But what if I flew?" Meanwhile, across the city, Clara watched from a distance as the light in Grace's room dimmed for the night. She called Michael. "She's overwhelmed," Clara said. "But I think she's starting to believe it's real." Michael's voice was calm. "Let her come to it on her own. This has to be her choice. We're not saving her. We're just giving her a door." The next morning, Grace walked into the hospital early and kissed her mother's forehead. The machines beeped steadily, but her mother's face looked peaceful as she stood there. A nurse walked in with a folder. "Miss Turner, some updates from Dr. Rowland, and there's a note inside." Grace opened the folder. Inside was a short letter typed on fine paper. "This is your story now. Don't wait for permission to live it boldly." She folded the letter and tucked it into her coat pocket, and for the first time in a very long time, Grace smiled, not out of relief, but from something far rarer, possibility. The letter stayed in her coat pocket all day, and yet its weight pressed against Grace like a quiet force guiding her steps. Everywhere she turned it whispered, "This is your story now." But was it really? Could a girl who cleaned homes, skipped meals to pay rent, and lived in the shadows of hospitals really step into a life she had only dreamed about from behind dusty windows? She sat on a bench outside the hospital later that evening, notebook in hand, trying to make sense of what her life was turning into. The old version of herself, cautious, hardened by necessity, wanted to reject it all. It felt too good, too perfectly timed, like a story that didn't belong to her. But the other part of her, the part that remembered the feeling of helping a little girl at an airport, the same part that clung to her mother's hand every time a new test result came in, was ready, not for ease, but for purpose. The page in front of her was blank. The pen hovered. Then, a voice beside her. "You still write the way people pray." Startled, she turned. It was Clara, the woman from the hospital, the bookstore, the one who always seemed to be nearby, without ever fully stepping into view. Grace blinked. "Oh, how long have you?" Clara held up her hands gently. "I'm not here to spy, just to see if the light was still in your eyes. I was hoping it hadn't dimmed." Grace gave a soft, tired smile. "It's flickering, I guess." They sat quietly for a moment, the city murmuring around them, the scent of coffee from a nearby cart blending with the chill of the evening. "Do you believe in moments that change everything?" Clara asked softly. "I used to," Grace replied. "Then I stopped. And now," she looked down at the folded letter, "now I don't know what to believe." "Well," Clara said, standing, "what if the truth isn't whether something can change your life, but whether you let it?" She walked away before Grace could answer. That night, Grace didn't go back to the motel. Instead, she took a long walk through the city, past the lit-up park benches, the sound of jazz from a distant club, the smells of bakeries preparing for morning. She walked as if trying to shake off the dust of her old life, and somewhere in that quiet haze of motion, she decided, not because of money, not because of pity, but because someone, somewhere, believed in her enough to give her a real choice. The next morning, Grace returned to 15 Beacon Street, not with her usual uncertainty, but with a strange steadiness in her step. Michael was already there, seated at the same fireplace, Leah curled up on the floor, drawing with a handful of colored pencils. She knocked once before stepping in. Leah looked up first. Her eyes lit up, and she ran over to Grace, hugging her knees. "You came back." Grace knelt down and smiled. "I did." Michael stood, his expression unreadable but his eyes kind. "Does this mean?" Grace reached into her pocket and held out the letter. "It meant something, and I'm ready to find out what." Michael nodded slowly. "Then let's begin." What followed over the next few weeks felt like waking up in a world that had been there all along, but had kept its doors closed until now. Grace was given a private apartment, small but filled with sunlight and bookshelves. Her mother was moved into a recovery center where nurses smiled with their eyes and actually remembered her name. The scholarship offer came through officially full tuition to a university downtown, where Grace could finally study what she'd always wanted, literature and social justice. And yet, the most powerful change was not what she was given, it was what began to bloom inside her. For the first time, Grace wasn't surviving, she was choosing. She volunteered at a community center on weekends, working with young girls who reminded her of herself, quiet, guarded, but full of stories waiting to be told. She joined a writing group, where her journals became essays. Her essays turned into speeches, and her words, once timid, began to carry weight. Michael stayed quietly involved, never imposing. He checked in through Clara or over the occasional coffee. They weren't friends exactly, but something deeper was forming: mutual respect, bound not by circumstance, but choice. One evening, after helping a young girl finish a story about growing up in foster care, Grace sat at her desk, notebook open. She wrote, "We don't need saving, we need space. We need people who see us without trying to fix us." That's what he did. That's what I want to do. And she meant it. She would never forget what it felt like to be invisible in a crowd, unheard in a system, forgotten by a world that rewarded noise and polished shoes. But now, she wasn't invisible. She was becoming the kind of person who sees others, and that, more than anything, was the beginning of something truly extraordinary. The sky over Boston had begun to shift into spring, soft, hopeful shades of gold and blue melting away the gray. The city was waking up, as if the sidewalks themselves were exhaling after a long winter. Grace stood on the edge of a small auditorium stage, her palms lightly sweating, a stack of handwritten notes shaking just enough to betray her nerves. The lights dimmed slightly. The crowd was quiet, expectant. She took one slow breath. This was not the airport, not the hospital, not her mother's room or the motel where the ceilings whispered defeat. This was her moment. And not because she was standing on a stage, but because she had chosen to be here. "My name is Grace Turner," she began, voice trembling just enough to remind everyone she was still human. "And I used to believe that life only happened to people with money, with connections, with plans so perfectly mapped out they never needed directions." A soft rustle moved through the crowd. "I didn't grow up imagining I'd ever stand in a room like this, let alone speak in one. I worked nights cleaning offices that looked just like this place. I watched people in suits walk past me, never once wondering who I was or what I dreamed of." Her eyes scanned the audience, some students, some faculty, others simply community members drawn in by her name on the flyer. But she wasn't the star here. The story was. But then, something changed. "I helped a little girl find her father at an airport. That's it. I didn't perform a miracle. I didn't have a badge or title. I just stayed with her when she was scared." She smiled gently at the memory. What I didn't know then was that her father would see that moment, and that he would see me, not the tired girl with old shoes and empty pockets, but someone who still believed in kindness even when she had nothing left to give. There was silence now, thick with emotion. "And he didn't give me a miracle," she continued. "He gave me a door." Grace paused, letting the words land. "I've walked through it slowly, sometimes scared, sometimes doubting, but each step has led me closer to the life I thought I'd never be allowed to live." She folded her notes and looked straight ahead. "And if I've learned anything, it's this. Sometimes, the person you least expect to be seen is the one the world most needs to see." The audience rose slowly, not from politeness, but from a genuine wave of emotion. Some clapped, others wiped their eyes. In the back row, Clara leaned against the doorframe, nodding, eyes bright. Michael, seated next to Leah, had his hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder. Leah beamed. "She's a real hero," Leah whispered to her dad. Michael smiled. "She always was." What followed was a whirlwind. Interviews, invitations, a short story Grace had written about her airport moment went viral. Teachers began assigning it to students. Non-profits reached out, but Grace stayed grounded. She still volunteered, still wrote in the same green notebook, still spent quiet Sundays beside her recovering mother, reading aloud like she always had. And then came the day her phone rang with an offer she hadn't expected. A publishing house wanted to turn her story into a book, not a novel, a memoir. She hesitated at first. The idea of her life being bound between covers felt surreal. But the editor said one thing that changed her mind. "Your story will remind someone else they're not invisible." That was all she needed. Months later, when the first copy arrived in the mail, Grace sat alone on her apartment balcony. The title was simple: The Girl at Gate 12, a true story of being seen. She opened the first page. There, in elegant print, it read, "For the ones who waited for their turn to matter." She looked up at the evening sky, where stars blinked shyly into view. She had been many things in her life: a cleaner, a caretaker, a stranger in a crowd, a helper in an airport. But now, she was also something else, a voice, and somewhere in a small town hundreds of miles away, a teenage girl curled up on her bed, reading the first chapter of The Girl at Gate 12. And with every sentence, something inside her began to shift. Because she wasn't just reading a story, she was realizing she had one, too, and that maybe someone would see her, just like Grace had been seen. That's how change begins, not always in big speeches or bold acts, but in moments of quiet courage, in kindness without witness, in the simple choice to stay, when it would have been easier to walk away, and in the heart of a young woman who once had nothing, but gave everything she had anyway. Grace Turner didn't change the world with a grand gesture. She did it by showing up, and that was enough to start a revolution of hope.